Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at chapters 10, 11, and 12. These three are about punctuation marks. Chapter 10 focuses on the comma. Chapter 11 focuses on the semicolon. And then we get into the quotation marks and how to deal with the punctuation marks as they are affected by quotation marks. So we'll get started first with the pre-test that's listed right here. Hotel and casino software developer Duito will expand its operations to Singapore, India, Japan, Australia, and China. There are multiple things as far as commas are concerned that affect this particular sentence. First of all, we have an appositive. What is an appositive? An appositive is a word that renames or describes one of the previous nouns and or pronouns. On page 310, it says, you will recall that a positive is rename, describe, and explain preceding nouns and pronouns. And a positive that provides information not essential or not required to the identification of its antecedent, the word to which the pronoun refers, should be set off by commas. The example that they give here is Peter Thiel, comma, co-founder of PayPal, comma, will speak to a group of business students this week. So the appositive, co-founder of PayPal, adds non-essential information, and so commas are required. You may pick up your order from the location closest to your home, comma, our Philadelphia branch. So that appositive renames closest to your home. Which one? The Philadelphia branch. It's non-essential, so it's set off with commas. So when a positive is needed to identify the noun or pronoun that it's mentioned earlier in the sentence, do not set it off with commas. So here we have the co-founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel. Notice there's no commas right there. Will speak to a group of business students later this week. It's needed to identify which co-founder will speak. Therefore, commas are not used. The book, The Art of Social Media, explains how to create a compelling presence on social media platforms. The appositive is needed here to identify the specific book. Therefore, no commas are used. One-word appositives do not require commas. My supervisor, Doug, sometimes uses my computer, but if you had a last name there, then we go ahead and offset it with a comma. So I say all of that to go back to the pretest, and we have an appositive that's referring to Duito's the appositive referring to the antecedent to which it refers, the hotel and casino software developer. So therefore, a comma is not necessary here. We will expand its operations to Singapore. They have items in a series, and we're going to separate each one of these, Singapore from India, from Japan, and Australia, offset all of them with commas, including the comma before the and, China. Your interview, Ms. Twarg, okay, this is a noun in direct address. All nouns in direct address should be offset with commas, as I've illustrated here. Will take place on Wednesday, comma, August 20, comma, at 10 a.m. These two commas are used to offset different parts of dates. Whenever you have a date component, look at how many elements there are. If there's two or more elements, offset each part with a comma. So August 20 is one element and Wednesday is one element. So we have two elements, so they must both be offset with commas. That's why those commas are placed in that position. Number 3, the attorney had reason to believe, by the way, that the judge was not impartial and might even be biased against his client. The word by the way is a non-essential parenthetical expression. It's just kind of inserted in there contrarily. By the way, use commas to offset something that's really not needed, that's not essential. Okay, number 4, Zappos moved its headquarters to Las Vegas, Nevada, and is helping to revitalize the downtown area. Offset a city from its state whenever you have both of those elements included. Two elements there. Thomas Edison, comma, the inventor of the electric light and the phonograph, comma, has 1,093 patents to its name. So two components to this particular question. We have a non-essential clause to describe who Thomas Edison is. So this is a non-essential positive, renaming Thomas Edison. So it's offset with commas on both sides. And numbers that are in the thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000s, millions, and so on are use commas to offset them. Unless, of course, it's like a social security number, then you don't use commas, or a phone number, or an address. We'll talk more specifically about those. But a number, how many patents? 1,093 patents. We need to offset the one with the comma. Number 6, after a long search, Kathy Sardi found a charming historic apartment in downtown Providence. Okay, we have an introductory verbal phrase after a long search. Offset introductory verbal phrases with commas. First, we need to know who's searching. Kathy is searching, so it's not a misplaced or a dangling modifier. Kathy is inserted right there and identifies who's doing the search. And she found a charming apartment or a historic apartment. When you can kind of insert the word "and" between two unequal adjectives, then use a comma to separate the two as well. So it can be called a charming apartment or a historic apartment. They're unequal, so use a comma to separate them. Number 7, the construction of the U.S. interstate highway system began in 1956, and it has given birth to many new industries. The coordinating conjunction "and" is responsible for joining two independent clauses, making it a compound sentence. Therefore, a comma before that coordinating conjunction is required if it has more than 13 words. Then the next question, number 8. John C. Lechner, PhD, is chairman, president, and CEO of Eli Lilly and Company. So his credentials are being used to offset. They're being offset on both sides of the credentials with commas. And we have an item in the series, so a chairman, president, and CEO. So we're going to put a comma between each part, including the last "and" before the last item. Number 9, although tired, here is another introductory verbal phrase. Who's tired? Employees are. So it's not dangling or anything like that. Anytime you have an introductory verbal phrase, use a comma to offset it. They preferred the evening, not the morning. Since that's a contrary statement, use commas to offset the contrary. Patricia T. O'Connor said, when a tiny word gives you a big headache, it's probably a pronoun. So we have a quotation. If it's considered to be a short quotation, what is a short quotation? Probably 1 to 1.5 lines is considered to be a short quotation, and it's introduced with the word "said." Or even if if we divided up the quotation and put this portion inside of the quotation, use commas to offset it on both sides. But if it's a short quotation, and this is a key component here, make sure that you, right after the word "said," that you put a comma, space, and then quote. When a tiny word gives you a big headache, comma, it's probably a pronoun. So inside your quotation, use a comma to offset an introductory adverbial clause or a dependent clause. A clause has a noun and a verb in it, and this is adverbial because it asks a question. When, where, oh my goodness, I forgot what an adverb is. Let's see, adjectives, what kind, which one, how much, how many, and modify nouns and pronouns. And adverbs ask the questions, how, when, where, to what degree, and to what extent. There we go, I had to kind of work that one together. And they ask the questions, how, when, where, to what extent, or to what degree, and modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. So when a tiny word gives you a big headache, since it's introductory, offset it with a comma. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the chapter. And the first one is simple. We use commas basically to identify when we want to pause, when we want the audience to recognize that a pause is necessary in order to add effect to the message. To communicate our message more effectively, we use commas to do so. We don't want to overuse commas, however. So in this first example, anytime that you have 3 items in a series, use commas to offset them. The example here is, the most common data accessed on smartphones are email, news, and directions. So we use commas to offset the 3 items in the series, including the "and" before the last item. So we can do nouns that have 3 items in the series. They could be verbs. They could be adjectives. They could be a variety of different types of sentence patterns within a sentence. But if you have 3 phrases, 3 clauses, whatever the case may be, use commas to offset them. Direct address. Anytime that you're addressing someone specifically, in this first one we're addressing Jonathan, in the second, members of the class of 2017, and this one, sir. Offset a noun in direct address with a comma. Parenthetical expressions. Those are words that really suggest something that's contrary, or they may be non-essential. Use commas to offset them. Here's a series of them. After all, as a matter of fact, as a result, at the same time, by the way, consequently, finally, for example, fortunately, and then there's a large list on the following pages. In summary, in the first place, in the meantime, no and yes, in fact, no doubt, of course, on the other hand, furthermore. So anytime that you have a parenthetical expression that's not essential, then use a comma to offset it so that it stands out, so you can have a natural pause there. With the word yes, if it's at the beginning of the sentence, or regardless really where it is, you can use a comma to offset it as you continue with your clause. So this is yes at the beginning, and then you can have a non-essential parenthetical expression in the middle, needless to say, offset it with commas on both sides. And then, okay, I really need to emphasize this one right here, the word no doubt. You have checked your resume for accuracy, no doubt. It's almost a question, it sounds like, but it's actually just a sentence. But that particular, trying to add that element of question to this, offset it with a comma. And it's at the end of the sentence here. Now, there are times when the words no doubt or other parenthetical expressions should not be offset with a comma. Look at these right here. However the vote goes. Look at the word however. Notice we've usually used a semicolon before it and a comma after it. Obviously it's at the beginning, and the word however is essential. Since it's essential to the meaning of the sentence element, we're not going to use commas to offset it. However the vote goes, comma, we will abide by the result. Whichever the way the wind blows, comma, we will meet to discuss the results. Here's no doubt. Here, it's leading toward a question. You have checked your resume for accuracy, comma, no doubt. But here, it says, I have no doubt that you will be offered the customer service position. Notice it's essential here. I believe that you will get the customer service position, so it does not have commas to offset it.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, dates and time zones. When dates contain more than one element, the second and succeeding elements are normally set off by commas. By the way, this is only one element right here, June 26. That's one element, so we don't have a comma to offset it. The second one, here's one element, June 26, and then we have a date, or a year. So there's 2 elements, so now we need commas to offset both parts. Here's a third one, Thursday, June 26, 2014. So it's more than 2 elements, we offset each part with a comma. Now this one right here is anytime that you have a month associated with a year, then you never use commas to separate between the month and the year. Note this particular clause right here. Commas are not used with the month and the year only. And furthermore, there is an exception to this particular rule. If I said in October 2014 and then I have a number immediately after it, then I would use a comma to offset it because I would not want to confuse that number with the next number that's right next to it, especially if it's unrelated. So that's an exception to that particular type of rule. Time zones are offset with commas. Our flight leaves Oklahoma City at 7:40 a.m. Central Standard Time and arrives in Boise at 1:16 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. The time zones are offset with commas in both situations. Okay, addresses. Okay, when addresses are written in sentence form, separate the parts of the address with commas. Do not, however, place a comma between the state and a zip code. Never, ever, ever do that. So in this particular example right here, let me pull it down so I can reach it. We have Edward Piazza, comma, Classic Journeys, the name of the company, comma, 7855, and notice the number does not have commas within it. Addresses do not. So 7855 Ivanhoe Avenue, comma, Suite 220, comma, La Jolla, comma, California. No comma after California in the zip code. Never place a comma between the state and the zip code. Geographical items. Use commas to set off a state when it follows the name of a city. So Milwaukee, comma, Wisconsin, comma, to Atlanta, comma, Georgia, period. So use a comma to offset a state when it's preceded by a city on both sides of it. The 17-hour Qantas flight from Dallas, comma, Texas, comma, to Sydney, comma, Australia, comma, is the longest scheduled nonstop flight in the world. So two commas set off the country unless it appears at the end of the sentence. Now back to the appositives that I mentioned earlier in the pretest section. Here we have an appositive renaming who Peter Thiel is. It's considered to be non-restrictive or non-essential, and if it's non-essential, offset it with commas. Now if I reversed it, the co-founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel, will speak to a group of business students. If it's reversed, then I don't need the commas, as they did right down here. So an appositive, first of all, positives rename, describe, and explain preceding nouns or pronouns. And a positive that provides information not essential to the identification of its antecedent, the word to which it refers, should be set off by commas, as they did right here. Now, when a positive is needed to identify the noun or pronoun referred to earlier in the sentence, do not set it off with commas. The co-founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel, we speak to a group of business students next week. Here, the appositive is needed to identify which co-founder. Okay, so Peter Thiel says which co-founder. It happens to be Peter Thiel. It's needed, so no commas are used. One-word appositives do not require commas. My supervisor, Doug, sometimes uses my computer. If it had Doug Nelson at the end of it, then certainly we would go ahead and offset Doug Nelson as an appositive, set off by commas. Okay, let's see. Independent adjectives, or adjectives that are not equal with each other, should be set off by commas. Generally, if you can insert the word "and" between the two adjectives describing the presence, then you use a comma. You can generally refer to this as a professional presence and a captivating presence. And captivating. See, I use the word "and" to describe what kind of presence. Adjectives modify nouns and pronouns and ask the questions what kind, which one, how much, and how many. Since these are unequal adjectives, use a comma to set them off from each other. Here, what kind of a person? An industrious person and an ambitious person. They're unequal. Use a comma to offset them. Okay, the adverb too. It means also. Whenever it appears at the end, in the middle of a sentence, use a comma to offset it. If it's included at the beginning of a sentence, use commas to offset it. But if it's at the end of a sentence, don't use commas to offset it. Also, don't use commas whenever you use the word TOO to mean something excessively. I had too much coffee earlier this morning. How much coffee? Too much. Since it means excessive, don't use a comma to offset it. Okay, here's the introductory verbal phrase. Whenever you have an introductory verbal phrase that usually begins with an ing word, an ed word, or two plus a verb that appears to be a verb that's not functioning as a verb and it's introductory, use a comma to offset it. Immediately after that comma, you need a noun or pronoun to refer to that verbal. That's why commas are necessary to offset them, because the word to which it refers to is immediately after the comma. So here's an ing word, working overtime, comma, we completed. Intrigued, an ed ending word by the idea comma. Emily, the one that's intrigued, offset by a comma. By enrolling early, who? You. Use a comma to offset the introductory verbal phrase from the noun or the pronoun. And then finally, to plus a verb. To prepare for the interview, who should prepare for it? You. You research the target company. The understood subject is you. Okay, prepositional phrases should not be offset by commas. Traditionally, they should not be set off by commas if they're in the middle of a sentence, unless you're using the prepositional phrase to mean something that's contrary or almost sounds like it's parenthetically inserted into a sentence. Then you would use the commas. If you have an introductory prepositional phrase and it has 4 or more words, use a comma to offset it. So here's a prepositional phrase that's introductory. On December 12th of each year, there is preposition 1 and preposition 2. Use a comma to offset those two prepositions from Krispy Kreme. During the winter months, use a comma to offset this introductory prepositional phrase. Okay, this next one, in 2014, vinyl records. This is only 2 words in this prepositional phrase. So, it does not need a comma because it requires 4 or more words. There's an exception coming up a little bit later on, and we'll look at that when we get there. On November 30, we expect no comma right there. Really, the only time that you would place a comma after that small of an introductory prepositional phrase is if an unrelated number immediately follows. Okay, independent clauses. Here we have a coordinating conjunction, and, but, or, nor, for, so, and yet, that separates 2 independent clauses, so we do require a comma. Let's see, we have the word and right here, separating 2 independent clauses. Joshua ordered, Isabella ordered, but it's fewer than 13 words. If it's fewer than 13 words, don't use a comma to separate it because it's considered to be too short to have a comma in it. This next section, do not use, says, as we learned in chapter 9, do not use commas when coordinating conjunctions join compound verbs, objects, or phrases in one independent sentence, independent clause. So we are delighted that you purchased your new vehicle from our dealership and look forward to servicing it for you. No comma is needed because and, right here, this and right here, joins the compound phrases of a single independent clause. Okay, if you have an introductory dependent clause, always use a comma to offset it. Generally, whenever you have an introductory dependent clause, it's adverbial. It's answering the question how, when, where, to what degree, and to what extent. And it modifies usually a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. When it's introductory, always use a comma to offset it. Down here in this portion, if it comes to the end, it says terminal dependent clauses. That means the clause appears at the end of the sentence. don't use a comma to offset it unless it's suggesting something that's contrary or it's considered to be perhaps maybe an afterthought. Then you could use a comma to offset it. So when you have time, comma, please proofread this report for me. If I turn it around, please proofread this report for me when you have time, then you would use a comma if you turn it around. And that's exactly what they did down here in this section. If you have any questions, please call me at extension 2306. If I turned it around and said, please call me at extension 2306 if you have any questions, then there would not be any comma to separate it because it's terminal, it's the end. Because oil prices fell, comma, the stock market experienced a decline in value. If I turn that currently, since it's introductory, I have a comma. If I turned it around and said the stock market experienced a decline in value because oil prices fell. Now we have a terminal dependent clause and no comma is necessary. By the way, as far as introductory verbal dependent clauses are concerned, if you have a conditional word like the words when, if, because, although, since, and then a noun and verb follows, it's probably going to be a dependent clause. If it's introductory, definitely use a comma to offset it. If it's the end of the sentence, most of the times you do not use a comma to offset it unless it appears to be an afterthought, or if that's what you're trying to convey that to your reader. Okay, let's see. This next section right here. Okay, do not use commas to set off clauses that contain essential information. This is from chapter 9, and generally it begins with the words who or which. Whenever you include a person's name and the adjective is describing that particular person's name, in that particular case it's generally not needed. So you'll use commas to offset it. But now we don't know which entrepreneur they're talking about. And then we have a who clause, which is an adjective clause that describes the entrepreneur. Adjectives they ask questions what kind, which one, how much, and how many, and they modify nouns and pronouns. So this clause right here is describing the entrepreneur. And it's needed for the understanding of this particular reference. Who, which entrepreneur are you referring to? Since it's a required clause, then we don't use any commas. So the entrepreneur who plans to open a small business should use the resources provided by the Small Business Administration. No commas to offset it since it's required. The word that as an introductory to a clause also describes something. Since it's usually inanimate, then go ahead and ensure that you don't use a comma. If you use the word which, you'll probably use a comma, as that's probably illustrated on the previous page that I failed to actually show you. So if it's usually which, use commas to offset it, but if it's that, don't use commas to offset it. Which organization? The one that offers a strong compensation package. So this one's required. Therefore, since this clause is required describing organization, no commas are needed. Let me go backwards now to the previous page. And we have some non-essential clauses. And let's see, not the one, this one right here. We received confirmation from Virginia Romenti of IBM, who will be speaking to our organization next week. This clause is non-essential. It's really not required because we know that she's with IBM. And since that's already known, then this descriptor is not essential. So that's why it's offset by commas. Okay, additional guidelines. Okay, when do you use commas whenever you're applying them to or not applying them to abbreviations? That's changed a little bit. In the past, we've always put a comma before junior, senior, that type of situation. But that's up to the individual, and so if that becomes part of their title, then certainly include it. If it's not part of their title, don't include it. So in this one, attorney Harry Connick Sr. Is the father of singer Harry Connick Jr. That's not applicable to their particular name and their abbreviation, so it's not included. In fact, the abbreviations junior and senior and Roman numerals added to a person's name are not set off by commas unless that person chooses to include them. When in doubt, ask that person or look them up online and find out how they use it in online environments. Company abbreviations such as incorporated and limited are set off by commas on the only if the company's legal name includes the commas, such as Netflix. Notice how incorporated is offset from Netflix on both sides of it because it includes it. How do I know if it's included or not? You can look at Google Finance and find out the name of the company. And if they don't include commas with it, then you don't have to as well. But look at BlackBerry with limited. That's the name of the company, BlackBerry Limited. So no commas are necessary there. Degrees and professional designations should be offset by commas. Also illustrated here. Okay, numerals. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a prepositional phrase that's introductory and has 4 or more words, then you use a comma. Otherwise you don't, unless you have an unrelated number next to it, which would confuse the reader if they blurred them together in some way, shape, or form. So here we are going to go ahead and force a comma since we have an unrelated number next to it. On page 10, comma, 2 illustrations. Very important that you place a comma there to offset the 2 unrelated numbers. Numbers, use the comma to offset thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, and so on. Don't use commas for calendar years or zip codes, telephone numbers, house numbers, decimal numbers, page numbers, serial numbers, and contract numbers. Notice there's no commas in those. Okay, a comma is used to show the omission of words that are understood. In November 2013, no comma here because there's not an unrelated number next to it, and it's fewer than 4 words. Buffalo received 7 inches of snow, semicolon. In 2014, Buffalo received 88 inches. That's why the comma's placed there because of omission of words. If you have contrasting statements, you use commas to offset them. We refer to buy American cars, not foreign cars, for our company's fleet. Not foreign is contrary to American, so it's offset with commas. The riskier the investment, comma, the greater the potential return. 1 comma is inserted there to show a contrasting statement that appears at the end of a sentence. The more he protests, comma, the less we believe him. So it's another contrasting statement that's offset with a comma. Alrighty, repeated words for clarity. What it was an intentional power struggle. Whoever goes at his or her own risk. No matter what, you have our support. In business, time is money. So these are contrasting statements where it doubles the words, and it would be confusing if you didn't have those commas there to separate them. And then finally, short quotations. Anytime you have a quotation that is probably about 1 to 1.5 lines on a page, it's considered to be short. If it's introduced by a verb, such as the word said, use a comma to offset it. Now, if this part is placed in the middle of the quotation, there's a quotation mark, there's never a dull moment, comma, end quote, said, Lynn Truss, comma, and then quote, in the world of punctuation period, semicolon. So we placed the said in the middle of a short quotation use commas to offset it, and then if it's the beginning, use a comma to offset the introduction from the quotation. Keep that in mind because we're going to build on that in the next chapter. Okay, FAQs. Is there a difference between lightening and lightning? Yes. Lightning, L-I-G-H-T-N-I-N-G, refers to that brilliant flash of light from the sky. We're in the middle of a lightning storm. L-I-G-H-T-N-I-N-G. Now, the word lightening would be, in this example, have you applied any lightening or to make it lighter filters to your image? Okay, I remember when company names with Inc. and Limited always had commas around these abbreviation. Has this changed? We've already talked about that. There's several companies that actually include the commas to offset them, and many companies also that do not include the commas. Check with Google Finance. That's where the official names of those companies are listed, and they will identify, that particular page will identify whether a comma is really required or not. Some examples where there's without commas is Gap, Apple. Notice that it's not separated on both sides of the Inc. And Caterpillar. And then companies that do include the comma is Novell, comma, Incorporated, comma, Macy's, comma, Incorporated, comma, and so on. Okay, when the company name Advanced Micro Devices, comma, Inc., period, comma, appears in the middle of a sentence, is there a comma following Inc.? Yes. As illustrated right there. Okay, how do you spell the past tense of spell? Is it spelt or spelled? Well, if you are on the other side of the pond, then certainly it's spelt. But for our writing, the past tense of spell is spelled, S-P-E-L-L-E-D. Okay, the last page of this chapter. Are these three words interchangeable? Assure, insure, and insure. Well, assure is to make assurances of something, A-S-S-U-R-E. It also is to make you feel good about something, to give you, suggest setting someone's mind at ease. So, the example of that one would be, let me assure you, or put your mind at ease, that we're making every effort to locate it, so it's A-S-S-U-R-E. Now, insure and insure, I-N-S-U-R-E, both of those particular words are very similar, but only use I-N-S-U-R-E if it's talking about an insurance policy or in relation to theft, something with insurance. So the building and its contents are I-N-S-U-R-E-D, to protect and to indemnify against loss, I-N-S-U-R-E. All other times use insure, E-N-S-U-R-E, meaning to make sure or certain or safe when not related to insurance policies. Okay, it seems to me that the word explanation should be spelled as explain is spelled. Isn't this unusual? There are a few words that do that, and we change the spelling from their original root words. For example, disaster is spelled this way, D-I-S-A-S-T-E-R, and then we make it to turn into an adjective, we change it to D-I-S-A-S-T-R-O-U-S. So it changes completely when it goes from a noun to an adjective. Maintain to maintenance, from a verb to a noun, changes the spelling. Repeat to repetition, when it goes from a verb to a noun, it changes. Despair to desperate, when it goes from a noun or an adjective to another adjective. And desperation even. And then pronounce and pronunciation. So there are some changes of spelling. Most words don't do this, so we're pretty safe most of the time. Is appraise used correctly in this sentence? We will appraise stockholders of the potential loss. No, it's not used correctly. Appraise means to set a value, property value. What is your property appraised? APPRAISED at. This means to inform stockholders. We will inform stockholders of the potential whatever. So apprise, APPRISE. Apprise means to inform, and apprise, to inform, has an I in it. Okay, the following three sentences appeared in an assignment my daughter received from her fifth grade teacher. It is going to be interesting. That first sentence, by the way, is correct, although in most business writing you should not begin a sentence with the words there or it. And then it goes on to say, for each state list, it is geographical region. On your map, identify each state and note its capital. First of all, we shouldn't show possession with any possessive case pronoun. So we're just going to get rid of the apostrophe there and say note its capital. And then right here, it is a contraction for it is geographical. That should just be a possessive case pronoun, ITS. How do you spell judgment without the E? Spell judgment without the E. Judgment. And I just moved to the United States from Croatia. Did I immigrate with an E or immigrate with an I? When you immigrate from somewhere, use an E. EMIGRATE. And if I immigrate to, notice the preposition that I'm using. From, use an E, and then to, use an I. So I immigrated from Croatia, or I immigrated to the United States with an I. E from, I to. Okay, so chapter 10 focused on the use of commas and the overuse of commas. Chapter 11 will focus more on semicolons and colons. And chapter 12 will conclude the chapter, the unit.